we go. Hi, my name is Tracey Adlai, and I am the founder and director of the Valley Film Festival. And I am so excited to be speaking with Tim Huebschle. Did I get that right?
100%.
From the web series Walking Forward, which is screening at the Valley Film Festival this year. So Tim, welcome. Just give us a little bit of a background on your filmmaking career.
All right. Funnily enough, I never intended to be a filmmaker myself. I sort of wanted to become a teacher. And so I signed up for an English language and German literature course at the University of Cape Town with the ideal long-term goal of becoming a teacher. But in the process of studying for my Bachelor of Arts, they had the opportunity of choosing a seminar for film theory. And I thought, well, this might be interesting. And I joined it. And the entire seminar was focused on Alfred Hitchcock's filmmaking. And in the process, I noticed how complex a storytelling medium film is, actually. And that is essentially where my sort of love to film started. And since then, I finished my literature degree, but I knew I was going to be a filmmaker. So it was just to have something on paper. And since then, it was all about trying to find a way of finding my own storytelling mode. I applied to film schools in Germany. It didn't work out, but I'm very stubborn. So I'm like, it doesn't matter that I didn't get accepted to the film schools. I'm still going to try make films. And 20 years later, I am still making films. I think I found my niche more in documentary, even though I have a strong heart for fiction storytelling. But specifically here in Namibia, also documentary storytelling seems to be the way to go, actually. And so, yeah, that's what Walking Forward in part is. It's sort of like a tango between fiction and faction. Let's call it factual filmmaking with a fictional twist to it, essentially.
I like faction. Like,
yeah.
I think we'll just call it that type of filmmaking faction from now on. You've coined a new word. So I am so excited to be talking to you because I love traveling, and I'm always very excited to see where our films come in from when they're submitted to the Valley Film Festival. I don't look at those first. Obviously, we're looking at the story content, and if it resonates, if we feel it'll resonate with our audience. And so when we were going down the programming rabbit hole this year, I was just surprised that we received a film from, and I know I'm going to botch this again, Namibia.
No, that's it, exactly.
And I knew where it was, like I knew where in the world it was, but it was a country I hadn't heard of before. So it was something that got me really excited. And so for those who don't know much about your country, it's on the continent of Africa. It's in South Africa, but it's below, it's west of Botswana, right? And it's south of
Angola and north of South Africa. So we're right there, sandwiched between Angola and South Africa.
So how did you end up there, or were you born there?
So I'm fourth generation in this country. My great grandfather decided, well, he actually, so I think I have to unpack this a little bit more complex. So Namibia used to be a German colony.
Yeah.
And this was about 100 years ago, essentially. And the German Kaiserreich at that time had soldiers that they sent to this country, and my great grandfather was one of those soldiers. And after he did his term, his service here, he decided to stay on, and had a farm in Namibia. And my grandfather was born on that farm, and my mother, a couple of decades later, was also born on that farm. And then my mom decided to go out to the world a little bit. She went to South Africa where she met my father, and they went to Germany, which is where I was born. But when I was 5 years old, my parents decided it's time to go back. And so my entire primary school, high school, all happened here in Namibia. And then I decided for studying, I went to Cape Town, just south of Namibia. And after I finished my degree, I went then for 3 years to Berlin to have a little bit of that feeling, big city vibe, because Namibia isn't, well, it's big in terms of land mass. So we have 825,000 square kilometers, which is pretty comparable to California and a couple of other states combined. But we only have 2.5 million people. So it's a little bit a village of a massive landmass. And but I love it here. You know, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of untold stories, which is also what I, as a storyteller, continue to seek out. And no, this is home. I'm Namibian. I'm full-blown Namibian. I have been my entire life. My wife is from here. We're happy here. We are exploring at some point post-pandemic to, you know, maybe try living in a different country just to expand the horizons again. But home truly is here in Namibia.
Awesome. So just a few more nerd questions about your country. And then I promise we'll get to your films and your collective. I'm really excited to hear about the creators in your country. So oh my gosh, I lost my thought. But so okay, I had a question. So this is the series Walking Forward, and actually your feature film Land of the Brave, which I loved, by the way, are the first language is English in these films. It's shot in English. Is that the primary language in Namibia?
So it's our official language, or as people here like to call it, the government language.
Right.
So our laws are in that language. Every time we hear from our politicians or our president, he addresses us in English. It's a very widespread language, but it's definitely not the language that everybody speaks. So another interesting fact about Namibia is that we are a population of 2.5 million, but we actually subdivide into 12 different ethnic groups with complete different sets of languages that have a difference, like Spanish and English is essentially. So the languages can't understand, it's not dialects, it's separate languages. And so the decision when Namibia became independent in 1990, the decision was made that the most unifying language is English. And that also has to do with the fact, obviously, most people in this country actually speak Afrikaans, which is a derivative of Dutch, which came in via South Africa, because South Africa also controlled Namibia for about 4 decades. And people like speaking it because it connects them on a different level, but it has also a politically difficult past, whereas English was seen as the struggle language and the language that brought people together. And so subsequently the decision was made, this will become the official language of our country and everything. Our constitution is written in English, our laws are written in English, the courts operate in English, everything on an official level happens on English, on a creative level too. But people like speaking Afrikaans, and most people don't have English as their mother tongue. So it's either their second or third language, but it is what we have chosen as sort of like the unifier.
Which is very similar to Berlin. So in Berlin, the government language is English as well, and which means I can visit your country and be able to get around without any difficulty. So I'm planning to do that, especially because in my sleuthing, you know, like I said, I was just like, oh my gosh, I've never heard of this country. Let me look at more. I read that Kubrick's 2001 used shots of the desert. I'm
Yes.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch this now.
Yeah. So it's specifically in the opening, the sequence where the monolith for the first time appears. In the background, you see a mountain structure with a big copy. I don't know the English word now for that, but that's Spitzkoppe. That's a very iconic location, which is about 280 kilometers from where I'm right now. That's the one film example. So Namibia over the last couple of decades has been every now and then used for films. Most famously and most recently, Mad Max Fury Road was pretty much for most part of it shot in this country. The Cell with Jennifer Lopez, which is a couple of years ago, that opening and ending scene with the dry trees in the desert, that was also shot here. The Prisoner, which was an HBO series, I think also about 10 years ago, was also shot in a coastal town of ours. So there's always been productions coming here, but not as extensively as in Morocco, but our desert has been featured always again. And yeah, it has also helped create a little bit of a film industry, but not that much, you know, because yeah, it's too few and far apart, the projects that actually do come here to sustain a full-blown service industry here.
So what is the primary industry?
So it is a combination of service industry, which is also geared towards commercials or TV productions. It is a lot of image films that get made, corporate videos essentially. There is an element of documentary filmmaking, not so much from locals. A lot of internationals like coming here because we really have a wildlife kingdom of note. You know, we have the largest free roaming cheetah population in the world. We still have a bunch of living rhinos, both black and white rhinos. We have lions, we have everything. And obviously we have the desert in terms of the nature and survivalist plants. So there's a lot of that's happening. And locally, a strong focus is on fictional filmmaking, which I think has to do with the fact that we're still trying to define ourselves. Who are we as storytellers? Even though I always try and advocate everybody locally to dig their teeth into documentary filmmaking, because the reality is you don't need that large a crew. You'll spend most of your time in the post-production. And the multitude of stories that are available here to tell that have international appeal, that should be more than just me and a handful of others who are interested in documentary filmmaking. Every filmmaker in this country should actually be focusing on, not make it maybe their main point of storytelling, but at least delve into documentary filmmaking, because even though it's harder, it's also easier to make. You know, it's a combination of both a little bit.
Awesome. So let's just segue right into your docuseries, Walking Forward, which will be screening at the Valley Film Festival. You are now on season 2, or you've completed season 2. Is there a season 3 coming before we dive into everything else?
Yeah. So we're trying to fundraise for the 3rd season. Which with all likelihood will be the final season. What we've tried with Walking Forward is not to ignore the pandemic. We actually pushed the pandemic in the foreground. So it's about the pandemic, but obviously none of us needs to hear sad stories. You know, we need to find hope somewhere in the midst of it all. And so season 3, where season 1 is about the creative economy and the arts and cultural sector, season 2 being about the healthcare sector and those that were right on the forefront of the pandemic, season 3 will look at tourism. And the reason for tourism is that one of the main economic incomes of our country is tourism. It has been, because just like how people are interested in every now and then shooting feature films here or other series, it's the landscape and the wildlife that really is a strong draw card. So much so that a fifth of our GDP is actually contributed from tourism. And as you can imagine, as we all know, the pandemic happened, borders closed, people stopped traveling. People in the local tourism industry really were hard hit, because they were so geared for international travelers that for us to find those that somehow adapted or are now starting to experience the renaissance, those are the ones that whose stories we want to actually hear and see what we as a not just as a country but as a world can draw from that.
So can you summarize Walking Forward as a series for us, and then specifically summarize season 1, since we will be screening episodes from season 1.
So before I go into the creative summary, let me just explain to you why I went there. I think what happened in 2020 is all our lives were challenged. I mean, I'm pretty sure for you as a festival who relies on in-person events, it must have also been insane. And I found myself last year in a place where I didn't know how to still make films. You know, would I be able to assemble a crew? How safe would it be to assemble a crew? What content can I create? You know, must I pretend now this is not a pandemic, or is this a pandemic? You know, am I going to create a series that has nothing to do with the pandemic? Meanwhile, all of us are wearing masks and permanently sanitizing. And so what happened is that the Film Commission, which is a funding body here locally, the Namibia Film Commission, actually had a call out to filmmakers from Namibia and said, guys, if you have a concept, we are willing to help you with some funding. And so we developed the idea of creating a series. And so Walking Forward season 1 came about. We need to sort of hear people from the creative industry, which is super hard hit because live events went away. Artists no longer could do art exhibitions. Musicians no longer could perform on stages. How do you guys survive in this pandemic? And what do you do to stay mentally okay? Because we always are only focused on the health side of things, you know, that hopefully we don't catch the virus. But this whole hope of hopefully not catching the virus or getting through it once we've caught it, that is actually something that psychologically really wears us down. And so the idea was to take one protagonist who is hard hit from that industry, who was actually at that point when the pandemic started unfolding, our protagonist, Ndino Molo, was actually studying in Indiana, and the country started closing. He was called back to Namibia before he could finish off his master's thesis there, and still believed in creating artwork. So he was the perfect guy to actually take us through the series. And now he had a standing relationship with a lot of the artists that we do feature. And so the whole idea of having conversations, how do you still keep on walking forward? And so the series title almost presented itself. How can we in a pandemic world still remain positive, still remain active, even though we are from an industry that is reliant on audience interactions? How do you push forward? How do you walk forward? How do you stay relevant? And this is where the whole idea came from. We need to tell different short lectures of interviews with people who really have something to tell. And obviously we were looking at those who still somehow try to make ends meet, because we could have gone a complete different direction. We could have told sad stories, people who had to give up and all that, but that's not what any of us need right now. What we do need are the glimmers of hope and those people who can inspire us.
So tell us about your host? You said he was in Indiana and went back home. Did you know him? And how did you connect with him?
So I've known Dino Molo probably for about 10 years or something. And I've known him mainly as an actor. And at some point he transitioned into, he likes using the term creative entrepreneur, which I totally admire. I think it's very cool. You know, if you turn creativity into a business, that's the way to go. Absolutely. So when he came back last year, this was about May or June, when he then first went into quarantine. And then he called me up. He, incidentally, he also has a small supporting role in #Land of the Brave film. He's the coroner assistant that carries off the body with face mask and hazmat suit. Who would have thought that it would have been prophetic? But anyway, he contacted me and wanted to talk to me about a project that he had in mind, about augmented reality, how to still create artworks during the pandemic that a person can safely experience on their own as they sort of venture out and about town. And I said, fantastic. I would like to talk to you about potentially other projects, because at that time already I had the idea, let me do something investigative, or let me do something that's a little bit magazine style, like Walking Forward, where you have a presenter or a host that goes out and interviews people. And so we had a cup of coffee on my balcony, and he spoke about his project, I spoke about mine. And in the end, it was easier to find funding for Walking Forward than for his. And once the funding was secured, I was like, are we going to do this in Dino Molo? How are you about this? And he said, absolutely, let's go ahead. And then we started developing the format more in detail. And obviously he did a lot of the writing, and he did a lot of the contacting with the various individuals that we do feature in our series. And it was essentially just combining those creative forces, and on the one hand, tell the positive story, but at the other hand, you know, also be efficient about the whole storytelling. So let's not spend forever on creating this. Let's make it sustainable, because I mean, hey, in 2020 and 2021, it's all about sustainability. How, and I'm sure it's the same for you as a festival. How can you stay afloat, you know, with dwindling numbers or challenges and all that? And I think we found sort of a way where we really could communicate well and work together well. And also, I mean, the blessing about Walking Forward, so it wasn't just the hope that we wanted to tell for the audience, but it was hope for ourselves working on it, because we had work. And we must actually, in a sense, be appreciative about that, because there were so many people last year that didn't have work and that were struggling to make ends meet. And we had this opportunity. So over and beyond sharing the hope to the audience, it was hope for ourselves. And I think I hope that seeps through in the series too, you know.
It definitely comes through, and your host just has such a great sense of humor, and he's very humble too. But he has like a wicked sense of humor
Yes.
sometimes,
Yes.
and I love it. So he's very engaging, and it just kept me watching the entire series. So well done there. I'm very excited that we get to showcase 3 episodes, but we will definitely include the link to the entire 2 seasons when I post this. But what is the creative community, specifically the filmmaking community, like? Is there a community? Because I noticed that you're part of a collective. Is that your own collective, and how many people are involved? Or, I imagine that the film industry is very small. Do you guys all work with each other? Tell me about the film industry there, and what, filmmakers from LA could expect if they were to hop on over and want to make a film there.
So My company's name is called Collective, that's correct, but it's actually only two of us who founded this company and are running it. And why we chose that name is essentially because we can never only operate as two people. So we work with a whole range of subcontractors because our internal company focus primarily is running the business on a business level and running it creatively. So securing projects and executing projects, but we don't have like editors or cinematographers or everybody under one hub. We hire the people in, and the idea for that name came from. So generally in Namibia, we do have quite a vibrant industry that in terms of age range goes all the way from early 20s up until the mid 50s. People do work together, but also people are competitors, obviously, as is the case anywhere in the world. And sometimes the reality is there's only so many projects that do go around. So the people you work with together on a preferential basis end up being more or less the same. And it's not, I don't want to use the word clicks, but it almost becomes like that. And generally, I think it's not unusual. The film industry, you have your favorites that you like working with, other people that you do know and that you don't necessarily work with. Generally, we have a lot of very capable people in all areas. So not just directing and production, but also hair, makeup, cinematography, editing, grips, everything is definitely available locally. And I think that's, yeah, makes it also very interesting. You actually, if we take the feature film that you also saw, Land of the Brave, the entire crew was Namibians with one exception. It was just the music composer who was not from here. Other than that, everybody that worked on the film was here from Namibia. And this is, so you are able to definitely work with local people only. And we do work together, but you have your preferences. I think that's natural. I mean, nobody anywhere else in the world would work together with everybody. You know, you find out who you actually click with, and then you start making more and more content with them.
So Land of the Brave is a feature film. It's a thriller. And you submitted it to the Valley Film Festival, and oh my gosh, I cannot wait to screen this one year. It is so good. You have a strong female lead, and you also, and this is just what I got from it, it really showcased the different classes in your country as well. Can you speak a little bit more about just about the film, and and did you write this? I'm so sorry for not being prepared.
No worries. Yes, I did write it. So the way it came about is we had a serial killer about 15 years ago, 2005 to 2007, oh, wow. who was coined or named the B1 Butcher. And his MO was to usually abduct ladies of the night, decapitate them, chop them up, and distribute their body parts over a couple of weeks along the main national road, which is called the B1. And I was very spellbound at that time because I hadn't recalled any other such story happening in Namibia. And so I was following all the newspaper articles and everything. And I'm like, and everybody was talking about this guy, you know. He was, by the way, never conclusively caught. The killings did stop. There was a suspect who committed suicide, but there were still body parts found after he committed suicide. So it's still actually considered an open case. But what was the thing for me was that everybody was talking about this serial killer. And I'm like, okay, if everybody talks about it, I'm interested in it. I try and read every newspaper article about it. It's actually the perfect basis for a story. or a movie, because everybody will be able to somehow connect to this or link up. And we, I mean, if you think of it, we do experience that now with the serial killer true crime series that are becoming the big thing on Netflix, where everybody watches them, and including myself, you know, and we fall asleep to them, even though if you think of it, it's actually something gruesome to fall asleep to, but never mind that. And I decided not to tell the actual story of the serial killer because of the mere fact that is still considered an open case. But I liked using it as a foundation to fictionalize and to talk about the underbelly of Namibian society. So there's a couple of aspects in our society that are very problematic and that continue being problematic. So one of them is how we deal with the past. So we have a very violent past that goes back to the German colonial era, that goes to the South African apartheid, which was implemented here, and which has never really fully been dealt with in this country. Meaning there's a lot of generational trauma that's actually still very much present and still seeps through in everyday interactions with people, especially people of different skin color. You start on a very not maybe straightforward or in your face level, but it's happening there in interactions with little sly comments. They don't have to be racial slurs, but it's just the approach of how things happen. So this is a major issue in our country. Even almost more major, because it transgresses all race and culture, is how women are treated in this country. It definitely has its footing in some of the cultural practices that are still happening to this day. Also with the generational trauma, and we have a high rate of gender-based violence in this country. So violent crimes against women. With murders, with actual really hardcore things that are happening. And some of it also deals with the third issue, which is we are a very alcohol-loving nation. So very, very much so. I mean, in the worldwide, we are number 2 with the per capita consumption of beer. So not all alcohols, but specifically beer, but generally, alcohol is a huge problem. And so taking those 3 elements, so how we deal with the past, how we treat women, and our relationship to alcohol, I found those 3 elements I could combine into a thriller and seed them in part with my protagonist. Obviously, Macy Willemse has a huge problem with her past and is not dealing with it, which is why it literally hits her over the head at the beginning of the film, and has resolved to alcoholism or to quieting the voices because alcohol helps her, and is trying to solve a case that deals with a lot of femicide, and these women are getting decapitated. What is a decapitation? It's removing somebody's identity, isn't it? So that was sort of what I found in that story and wanted to tell it. I mean, it's dark, but in the end, there's a little bit of hope. But it was my way of showing to Namibia primarily, but also to the world, what we are struggling with here. And yeah, still are struggling with, for that matter.
Awesome. So I just have a few more questions for you. One, pitch your country to filmmakers from the US. Why should we come over there and shoot?
Wow. Okay, you put me on the spot, don't you? Okay, so if you want the most beautiful pastels colors early in the morning and late in the afternoon, with mixed in with beautiful brown scenery of grass and sand, and once you wrap filming the best meat in the world, this is the place to come. I hope I did well.
I'm sold. I'm sold. I'm coming over. My second to last question is, what did you learn about yourself? during the making of Walking Forward or just during the pandemic?
Yeah. Okay. So the one aspect of Walking Forward that actually is pretty awesome, it reintroduced me to editing. So about 10 years ago is when I stopped editing my own films and worked with a preferable editor. But obviously, what happened during the pandemic is everything became tighter financially. And so I'm like, okay, the one way that I can save budget is by actually starting to edit myself again. And it was beautiful because it was sort of like rekindling with, I don't know, a high school sweetheart that you really had a strong heartbeat for. So as I started editing, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember those feelings and those decisions and those movements that you make. So for that, I'm very grateful. And since then, I haven't stopped editing anything that I create. In terms of the broader pandemic, I think what it did do, and I'm almost gonna sound like quoting people from the series, but it did reveal ourselves to ourselves. So if we were not sure about what we're doing right now, well, you were definitely not sure anymore once March 2020 happened here in Namibia, where the lockdown started being implemented. But the reality is, I think it's always important to look at both sides of a coin. So there's been a lot of widespread death and suffering and dying here because of the pandemic. But also what COVID-19 enabled is just to revisit anything that we believed in and start acting on it. You know, it really was also a reset button. You remember on computers, we used to have those reset buttons. They're not that common anymore, but that I think is also what the pandemic actually is, if you look at it in a broader picture. And I think it was important and remains important for that. Obviously, we need to now sort of figure out how we can still, you know, make a living and survive. And if we do manage all of that, then I think COVID-19 will have served a greater philosophical purpose than just being the global pandemic that it is.
Wow, that was heavy.
Yeah, well, it's your question.
I hate to follow up with this one then, because my final question is, what movie are you going to see? What is your first movie in 2 years in the cinema?
Dune.
Nice.
I want to go and watch Dune because I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with all the marketing and the hype around it, but being a boy from a desert country, you know, which Namibia truly is, having the opportunity to see a planet that is a desert place and the whole mythology around it. Mind you, I mean, I have a soft spot for the Dune story from the early 90s when there was a computer game released by Virgin back then. And a couple of friends of mine and myself, we used to binge play it for like, I don't know, hours on end. So the whole Paul Atreides storyline and everything around it is nothing new to me. But to see a modern iteration of it and to see the desert glamorously shining on the big screen while I'm wearing my mask, yeah, that'll be, I think, the first one in, yeah, since, I don't even know, I think January 2020 is the last time I was in a cinema. Hey? So this would almost be 2 years. Hey?
Wow. Enjoy. I hope you have a fabulous time back at the cinema. And thank you so much for your time today.